So let's talk about the different boat types that are out there. I'm going to quickly run through them and then we'll come back and explain each one. But the different boat types are center console, bay boat, hybrid, dual consoles, catamarans, outboards, inboard outboards, and then jet boats / wave runners. Let's start out with center consoles. Center consoles is a wide-ranging word. It can cover a multitude of different styles of boats, but typically the main part of it is that the console where you're steering the boat from is in the center of the boat, and that you'll walk down each side to get to the front or to the rear of the boat. They'll vary immensely based on seating. Some are set up as center console more towards the fishing side. Some are set up towards what we call the family sports side, meaning a lot of seating for the family for tubing and things like that, but also a great way to also fish. The other advantage that center consoles have is they have the ability to walk 360 degrees around the boat without taking the rod out of your hand. Hence the reason it's called a center console. Now within center consoles, what you want to consider is also length. Obviously, the more length you have in a center console, the more things that can be in it, the more seating can be in it. So if we look at, like I say, a 189 Key West, you may not have forward-facing seating, but in the next version up, the 203, you do, and you have to determine what's important to you on that. Now, when you look at that center console, typically they do have a larger console, so you have the ability to have a lot more storage in the console, or even a porta potty or a full head, depending, even layout areas on the larger center consoles, 30 feet and up, you can see that. The second type of boat would be a bay boat. So a bay boat, once again, has a console in the middle. So why don't we call it a center console? Reason why we call it a bay boat is it's typically geared towards inshore fishing. And inshore fishing, the reason why it's set up the way that it is, with a front casting platform and a rear casting platform, and usually multiple live wells, is the person that's going to pick that boat, their primary experience they're looking for is to inshore fish. And with inshore fishing, you can have different live baits, so that's why you have multiple live wells in most of the boats. You'll have a big casting area up front because that's where you're going to spend a lot of your time. It's set up typically for trolling motors. It's pre-wired for trolling motors. You also have the ability to reach down into the water. You're closer to the water than a center console. It's a little, what we call the gunnel height, which the gunnel height is the distance from the floor of the boat to the top of the gunnel. And typically on bay boats, it's lower than it is in center consoles, and it gives you an easier experience to reach over, to lip a fish, or to go ahead and use a net in a fish. And if you're fishing inshore, you're typically not dealing with maybe the wave height that you could offshore, so you don't need quite the security. Does that mean you can't take a bay boat offshore? No, it doesn't mean that at all. But typically, your primary objective is, if you're purchasing a bay boat, is for inshore fishing or very near shore fishing. The other type that has come out in the last 7 years is called a hybrid. A hybrid would be what I would call a liger. Which is it, a lion or a tiger? Well, the same thing goes with a hybrid. It's supposed to be a cross between a center console offshore boat and a bay boat. Depending on the manufacturer, will depend on whether it's geared more towards the offshore or geared more towards the inshore. And that's something that a salesperson can help walk you through, and you walk through yourself and see the differences between those types of boats. And that may be, if you're looking for multiple uses, that may be something that you want to consider. The other version is, another version of boat is called a dual console. So a dual console, what we call also / bow rider. Bow rider term is usually used in freshwater. Dual console is usually used for saltwater boats. The difference with that is it's more set up like a car, where you'll have front seating area, but your helm is off to usually the starboard side, way to the side, as opposed to being in the middle and having a higher seat in the center console. In the dual console, you'll sit down and to the right and you're lower. Why do people go this route? They go that route because maybe fishing isn't the #1 reason why they're buying the boat. That could be just family ride around. What they do usually offer in dual consoles is a larger cockpit area, which is the area behind the helm for socialization that you wouldn't get in necessarily in a center console. They also offer a lot of times maybe more cooler space, more entertainment features. in a dual console. The other thing that they'll usually do in a dual console is they'll have a head area out onto the port side, depending on the size of the boat and depending on the type of boat. But one thing is for sure on the dual consoles is you're going to have that wraparound windshield, which a lot of people like from the standpoint of knocking down the wind. And then you can choose between a bimini top or a hard top, just like you can do it in a center console. You can choose a T-top, which would be a canvas frame T-top, or you can do a hard top with just fiberglass on top instead of just canvas, or you can do a bimini. Those are all the three choices that are available, and really those choices are available a lot of times in all three styles, or the center console or the dual console. Another type of boat we want to talk about is a catamaran. So the difference between a monohull, which typically a monohull is typically V, what everybody considers a boat, whereas a catamaran is two hulls that are together and they track together. They're the same on both sides. Their advantages on the catamarans are they tend to have more room in them because they don't come to a point out front. They tend to stay with their beam, or what we call the beam is the width of the boat. Typically on most center consoles that are monohulls, the beam is going to be measured usually somewhere about 3/4 of the way up on the boat. That's the widest part of the boat. In a catamaran, it's typically the same width the whole way through. So it gives you more room. It also gives you more stability because it'd be like your coffee table with things sitting out to the side. You know, like every boat, as I said before in other videos, there's no perfect boat out there. The drawback to a catamaran is cost. Typically it runs with two motors. With that extra space comes more surface area, which comes more glass, gel coat. All of that tend to be a little heavier, so their costs are much higher when you consider them a 23-foot, say, catamaran versus a 23-foot monohull. Now let's talk about the two types of propulsion that are out there. Well, there's three types, but we're only going to talk about two that are mainly used in our area. We're going to talk about outboard and inboard outboard. So an outboard boat will have an engine that you can plainly see that's bolted onto the back. And there's various manufacturers. There's Yamaha, Mercury, Suzuki. There's also Honda out there as an available option on the back. The advantages on that boat, especially in saltwater, is those are all made with different alloys, and they're not going to have the corrosion issues that straight steel would be when you consider your car. The other side of it is you can tilt the motor a lot of times the whole way out of the water. So if you keep the boat in the water, a lot of times that engine doesn't, the lower part of the engine where the propeller is, doesn't have to stay in the water. The other type of motor is what we call an IO, or inboard outboard. That's more like your car engine, and your car engine, it's going to work just like that, except that a lot of times in bigger boats it sometimes has what we call a heat exchanger, would be similar to a radiator. On the smaller boats, it's going to cool itself with the regular water, what we call the raw water, which is, if you're in saltwater, it's saltwater. If you're in a freshwater lake, it's lake water. The drawbacks on IOs in saltwater is they're typically not set up with the different alloys, and so you'll have some issues with them down the road, 3 years, probably manifolds and risers, even if you flush it every time, that you wouldn't have with the outboards. Both are 4-stroke, so they're just like your car engine. Turn the key, they're fuel injected, start it up, and they go. The last type of boat that I would talk about is the jet boats and wave runners. Those are, obviously wave runners are something that we don't really compete with the boats, but we do have with the jet boats, those are becoming more popular. One drawback to them is that they do not have the ability, once they lose power, you have no steering ability, because the jet actually moves on the boat to help the boat turn. And they usually make one type, and it's not always for saltwater. And so in saltwater uses, sometimes what you find is their boats are, you start seeing some things falling apart on hinges and things just because they're not using stainless steel, which is more expensive. Those are the various kinds of boats, and the next step for you is really to go out and look at them and get a feel for each type of boat and see which boat is going to work best for you.